Hi everyone. Our group will use Singapore as our discuss country, and our presentation will divide into five parts. And I will respond the first part, the impacts of globalization and the influence of local laws and Australian enterprises. And the first question is to discuss the impact of globalization on Singapore's economic system and political system. And we will discuss the economic system first. In terms of the economic, Singapore has benefited from the process of globalization, and this is a beneficial country of it. This is due to Singapore's long-term adoption of an export-oriented strategy and its long-term reliance on foreign investment as a core driving force for its economic growth. This has enabled Singapore's economic system to benefit to a large extent from the process of globalization. During our research, we found that the Singapore mainly participates in globalization through two mainly parts. The firstly is a highly open trade system. The Singapore adopts a highly open trade system in its foreign trade, where its superior location and policy support. Its total trade volume has long exceeded about 300 of the Singapore's GDP. At the same time, Singapore actively signs regional free trade agreements like the FATTA. As a result, the country is basically in a state of zero tariff barriers, which has greatly enhanced the impact of the globalization on Singapore's economic system. And second one is a friendly policy environment. Singapore adopts a friendly foreign policy in economic and a strong management for companies and attracts them to make long-term investments. Meanwhile, Singapore has a highly market-oriented resource allocation, which provides a favorable market environment for companies and attracts more enterprises to invest in the country. Singapore is a typical country that has excellent institutional stability for a high degree of economic openness, which has also brought significant benefits to Singapore's economic system due to globalization. And the second part is to discuss the impact of the globalization on Singapore's political system. And for this question, Singapore differs from many Western countries in that it has achieved a highly literate economic and a highly centralized politics. Singapore provides a stable policy environment for market development through its highly political system. This is mainly reflected on its fact that the Singapore is a leading position in key national industries such as finance, the economic, the finance, and the scientific part. At the same time, the Singapore government has enhanced its appeal to global companies through the legal system and the technological system, which has also helped Singapore benefit from a process of globalization. Overall, Singapore's political and economic system has not been weakened by the process of globalization. On the contrary, the globalization has brought more development opportunities for Singapore. And the next question we want to discuss is the changes posed by Singapore's legal system to Australian enterprises. And we think the government of Singapore will make three changes for the Australian enterprises. The firstly is a leading role of national supervision and guidance. Singapore adopts a highly centralized political system, which the government having extremely high power. Will the regulatory authorities enforce regulations very strictly for Australian enterprises? This may lead to the high company's costs, and the company's management need to quickly adapt to the local regulatory culture and the speed of political change. And the second change is the industrial competitive disadvantages. Although Singapore has a principle of a free market, the government holds a main position in many special industries. This puts Australian companies in related industries at a structural disadvantage, as national policy protection will provide better support for local Singapore enterprises, and the Australian companies in related industry have long been in disadvantages. The last change we think is labor and immigration regulations. The Singapore government in place a strict supervision and quota system for immigrants and foreign labor. It's aiming to protect the working environment for its citizens. However, this will cause problems for Australian enterprises, such as limited flexibility in human resource and the increased costs for regional talent. At the same time, as the company's senior management finds it's difficult to manage and guide Singapore for a long time, it will also make the development of difficulties. And that's all about my part, and let my teammates to discuss the next parts.
Next, I will answer question 2, economic development and human development, the case of Singapore. In this section, I will analyze Singapore's level of economic development and human development using relevant international business concepts and development indicators before explaining which type of development measure is more important for Australia firms considering entry into the Singapore market. It's important to begin by clarifying that economic development and human development capture related but fundamentally different dimensions of national progress. Economic development focuses on countries' capacity to generate income and productive output, while human development considers whether these economic outcomes translate into improvements in health, education, and overall quality of life. A robust country analysis therefore requires examining both perspectives rather than relying on income measures alone. From the perspective of economic development, Singapore is widely regarded as its highly developed economy. One of the most commonly used indicators in international business analysis is GDP per capita, particularly when adjusted for purchasing power parity, as it provides insight into average income levels and repurchasing capacity across countries. By this measure, Singapore consistently ranks among the highest income economies globally. This reflects not only strong income generation but also exceptionally high labor productivity, which is characteristic of economics specializing in high-value activities rather than labor-intensive production. Another defining feature of Singapore's economic development is its exceptionally high degree of openness to international trade and investment. Singapore functions not only as a domestic market, but also as a regional commercial hub connecting Southeast Asia with the global economy. This openness enhances efficiency and accessibility for region firms. However, it also intensifies competition as Australian companies entering Singapore face not only local firms but also a tense concentration of multinational enterprises. While these economic indicators clearly position Singapore as a highly developed economy, they do not fully capture the quality of the business environment or the sustainability of long-term operations. High income levels alone do not guarantee workforce capability, social stability, or predictable consumer behavior. This limitation highlights the importance of considering human development alongside economic development. Human development is most commonly assessed using Human Development Index, which combines indicators for health, education, and income to provide a broader measure of social well-being and human capacity. Singapore performs extremely well across the three dimensions, placing it firms among countries with very high human development. High life expectancy reflects effective healthcare systems and public health outcomes, while sustained investment in education has produced a highly skilled, capable, and international-oriented workforce. However, a more announced assessment also recognized the limitation of accurate human development indicators. Despite Singapore's high overall human development, factors such as income inequality and high cost of living mean that economic prosperity is not evenly experienced across the population. For firms targeting consumer markets, it implies that high average income levels may mask significant variation in purchasing power across the different segments. As a result, Australian firms may carefully align pricing and marketing positioning strategies rather than assuming uniformly high consumer demand. This leads to the question of which type of development indicators is more important for Australian firms, considering as GDP per capita are useful for assessing market maturity, more and cost structures. Human development indicators are generally more informative, predicting firm level outcomes. Human development more directly influences labor quality, managerial capacity, consumer sophistication, and the reliability of the institutional environment. Importantly, the international business literature consistently suggests that human development and institutional equality shape firm-level performance more directly than aggregate income measures, particularly in advanced, service-oriented economies such as Singapore. For Australia, firms operating in sectors such as professional service, education, finance, healthcare, or technology success depends heavily on human capital and service quality rather than market size alone. In conclusion, Singapore demonstrated both exceptionally high economic development and very high human development, supported by sophisticated economic structure and strong human capital foundations. For most Australia firms, human development indicators provide most actionable insight into long-functional viability and competitive advantage. Although this could always be interpreted alongside economic development measures to form a balanced and context-specific market entry assessment.
Next, I will analyze the cultural distance between Singapore and Australia. According to Ronan and Shankar's cultural clusters, Singapore belongs to the Confucian cluster, characterized by high power distance, collectivism, and situation-oriented, while Australia, as part of the Anglo group, has low power distance, individualism, and rule-oriented. However, does this geographical model, based on 1980s commercial data, still accurately depict the highly mobile and digitalized world of today? Keep this in mind and we will discuss it later. According to Hofstede's cultural dimensions, we can observe three significant differences between the two countries. Singapore has high power distance, and its society tends to view the hierarchical order as unnatural and beneficial, which is applied in the business context as a vertical social structure, while the Australian society values egalitarianism and believes that through equal dialogue, better innovation can be stimulated. Data shows that the two countries present a different attitude in the individualism-collectivism dimensions, which is one of the main sources of cultural distance. In Singapore, personal identity first comes from the group they belong, while Australia values individual uniqueness. As a resource-poor city that highly relies on global trade, Singapore has developed extremely strong adaptability, while Australia, as a country with a mature procedural democracy and legal system, society tends to reduce uncertainty by establishing clear rules, procedures, and plans. In these three dimensions, the data shows that the differences between the two countries are not so obvious. Australia emphasizes more on competition and personal achievements. In Singapore, achievements are equally important, but it emphasizes more on efforts and social recognition. Compared to Singapore, the Australian society encourages leisure and entertainment. However, we need also notice that Hofstede's model assumes national culture as homogeneous, which is problematic for multicultural societies such as Singapore and Australia. By comparing these six dimensions, we have obtained a seemingly contradictory picture. On the one hand, there are obvious differences in relationship patterns and fundamental values between Singapore and Australia. On the other hand, they are similar in response to external challenges. So, does this mean that the cultures of the two countries are moving towards convergence under these consensus areas? I will discuss this using the phase negotiation theory. Singapore, as a high-context collectivism society, its communication core is interdependent phase, which means maintaining harmony, preserving both parties' dignity, and resolving conflicts through indirect means. While Australia is a low-context and individualism society, its core is self-oriented phase, emphasizing clear and direct expression of one's own opinions to solve problems. This means that even when business people from both Singapore and Australia have the same ambition for a certain project and have made the same meticulous plan, the communication, negotiation, and conflict resolution methods they adopt at the conference table are still followed to completely different cultural grammars. In other words, the two countries are integrated on the surface but divergent on the core. First, the force of surface convergence is real and strong. It mainly manifests in two aspects. One is the global standardization of work scenarios and digital ecosystems, such as shared working languages and collaboration tools. The other is the common advocacy of modern values like agility and sustainability. such as Singapore's Smart Nation Initiative and Australia's NISA. However, the resilience of deep-level divergence is more enduring. For instance, how to treat authority, how to define oneself, and how to view pleasure and responsibility. Let's go back to the initial questions. Does this geographical model based on the 1980s business data still accurately describe the highly mobile and digital world of today? In other words, in the digital world, do those two countries with significant cultural differences shows a tendency towards convergence? My answer is yes, but only on the surface. We can see that the software they use, the trends they follow, and even their working languages are indeed becoming more similar. However, at a deeper and more fundamental level, such as how society defines authority and equality, the relationship between the individual and the collective, and the basic attitude towards life, there are still differences between the two countries.
Part 4 will focus on how classical trade theories explains the industrial specialization of Singapore. As a small resource-limited city-state, Singapore's development paths offer a compelling real-world application of these theories. The key question is, which theory best guides its strategies? Adam Smith's absolute advantage or David Ricardo's comparative advantage? Firstly, let's look at the absolute advantage. This theory suggests that a country should specialize in producing goods and services where it is the most efficient. Singapore clearly demonstrates this in several high-efficiency sectors. The world-class port and logistics, renowned for speed and reliable. A leading global finance hub built on strong regulation and talent. Advanced air transport and high-tech manufacturing. These sectors share a common trait. They depend not on natural resources but on efficiency, managing, and technological expertise. Through strategies invested in infrastructure, education, and institutional equality, Singapore has built absolute advantage in these fields. However, absolute advantage alone doesn't tell the full story. Given Singapore's constraint in land and labor, it cannot be the most effective in everything. This is where David Ricardo's theory of comparative advantage becomes central. This story argues that a country should specialize in industries where its opportunity cost is lowest, even if it isn't the world's best producer. For Singapore, it was a strategic imperative. The opportunity cost of pursuing land-intensive or low-skilled manufacturing was simply too high. Instead, the focus shifted to this section where Singapore's limited resources could generate a high return. It led Singapore towards high-value, knowledge-intensive industries such as semiconductor manufacturing. This section aligns Singapore's core strengths, the high-efficient allocation of knowledge, capital, and information in a global setting, making it the nation's sustainable comparative advantage. The trade pattern is clear: import basic goods and commodities, export high-value products and services. As a small city-state with limited resources and labor, Singapore's trade policy should be grounded in the theory of comparative advantage. The key lies in reducing opportunity cost, which aligns perfect with the strategy need to specialize in the global value chain. The nation's core comparativeness stems from the allocation of knowledge, capital, and information. These focuses are the highest transferable and capable of generating significant economies of scale. While Singapore has established a dominant position in sections like finance, it must keep upgrading the industries, such as transformation to green shipping and fintech, to sustain its strong comparative advantage. As a global trade shifts towards service and the digital economy, this strategy facilitates the continuous optimization of the resource enabling Singapore to maintain its existing advantage while enhancing its competitiveness and fostering emerging fields such as AI and biomedicine. In conclusion, dynamic comparative advantage strategy is helpful to Singapore to maintain its competitiveness and adaptability in the rapid change of global economy, while absolute advantage shares can be used as a supplement. So all in all, while Singapore exhibited absolute advantage in special service section, its overall industry structure is best explained by comparative advantage. By specializing in high opportunity cost industry and supporting them with enabling policies, Singapore provides a powerful practical case study. It shows how classical trade theory, particularly Ricardo's insight, can be successfully applied in achieve comparative in the global economy.
Next, I will analyze the trade policy instruments and related theories. We know that Singapore is a small and highly open economy. It has very limited natural resources and a small domestic market. As a result, its government relies heavily on trade policy to stay competitive in the global economy. I will analyze the trade policy instruments used by the Singapore government and explain how they reflected two key international trade theories. First, free trade agreements and comparative advantage theory. Singapore has signed many free trade agreements, including RCEP and CPTPP. These agreements reduce tariffs and trade barriers. Singapore does not compete on low labor costs. Instead, it focuses on high-tech manufacturing and financial services. The manufacturing firms and financial institutions benefit from clear market access and investment rules under these agreements. This allows Singapore to fully exploit its comparative advantages, rather than protecting inefficient industries, thus accessing foreign markets more easily. So, what theory can be related to it? Comparative advantage theory, which suggests that countries benefit from trade by specializing in what they do best, rather than producing everything themselves. Now we take an example to further explain it. Singapore Technologies Engineering, an international comprehensive engineering company covering aerospace, defense, and digital tech, etc. In 2025, it secured new contracts involving high-value engineering services, which often rely on access to overseas markets and global supply networks. By reducing tariffs and simplifying trade rules, FTAs allow the company to work more closely with international partners and become more deeply integrated into global supply chains. This illustrates how free trade agreements help Singapore firms export high-value manufacturing outputs and compete internationally. The Singapore government has invested heavily in trade facilitation, including digital customs systems, automated ports, and highly efficient logistics infrastructure. These measures reduce transaction costs, shorten processing time, and lower uncertainty in cross-border trade. By making trade faster and more predictable, trade facilitation effectively expands the size of the market that firms can serve. This directly reflects new trade theory, which emphasizes that access to larger markets allows firms to achieve economies of scale and benefit from network effects. A clear example is the Port of Singapore, one of the busiest and most efficient ports in the world. Because trade facilitation ensures smooth and reliable trade flows, many multinational firms chose Singapore as a regional logistics hub or headquarters. As more firms route their trade through Singapore, shipping volumes increase and logistics networks become denser. This makes the port more valuable to existing users and attracts even more firms, creating a self-reinforcement network effect and first-mover advantage. In summary, While free trade agreements support specialization based on comparative advantage, trade facilitation enables economies of scale and network effects highlighted by new trade theory. Together, these policies strengthen Singapore's role in global trade. That's all of my presentation. Thanks for listening.